My life is hard. No one understands. No one gives me a chance. Who do you point the finger to when life becomes difficult? This topic of personal responsibility isn't easy for most people, but it is a topic that is vital to talk about if you want the keys to experiencing a full life of joy, freedom, and love. I have a very special guest who is a living example of living this full life. He was paralyzed at 18 when he fell out of a tree, but that did not stop him. He is a speaker, author, and a member of the Spinal Cord Injury Hall of Fame. But to me, he is a progressive thought leader who is leading the pack of modern people with disabilities. Please welcome Gary Karp. Gary, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Pauline. Really glad to.
Good. I know there's this topic of personal responsibility, and I definitely get to that. But I wanted to ask you so we can connect with our audience. What is your background? If you can tell me a little bit about your experience of when you became disabled and.
Well, I was an 18-year-old suburban middle-class kid in the outskirts of Detroit when I fell out of a tree in 1973. And it was just that kind of a childhood, school, friends. I've been a musician since I was a kid. I started doing photography when I was 13. So I was always a creative kid. And I was, young hippie with the long hair and all the other accoutrements that come along with that. And then I was on a track to study architecture when I became injured. And then I did. After my injury, when I got out of rehab, I did earn a degree in architecture.
So did you continue a career in architecture?
While I was an architecture student, I discovered that graphic design was the thing that I actually had the greatest talent and the interest in. And I worked in architecture for about a year, and that's what I was doing. And then I followed a new career path as a graphic designer for 11 years. And then I developed tendinitis from computer graphics. So I have a secondary disability, and I had to go through another process of adjustment and figuring out what to do next. And the short version of the story is that ultimately it led to an opportunity to write my first book, Life on Wheels. And that's what set me on this course of being an advocate and a communicator, really the way I think about it, around the topic of disability. But basically I'm a writer, and I have a voice, and I'm a performer, and I'm a ham, and I just bring all that to bear. And it just happened that disability is the topic that my life set me on this path where I can be of service.
Gary, I know you were disabled at 18 years old, and you seem very well adjusted now, but that didn't happen overnight. So I want to just take a moment to go back and see how you transitioned through the change in your body. And since our topic is personal responsibility, see at what point that happened, and we'll go through the process of how your life shifted when you did take personal responsibility. But if you can kind of take us back to the beginning stages of that transition for your body, and just let us know what mindset you had at the time, what attitude did you have at the time that helped you move forward in your journey?
Denial was really useful for me. And it's an ironic mix, because on one hand, it lets me just keep moving forward and not get too tied up with what I think I might not be able to do. And I was fortunate growing up. I worked in my father's drugstore from the time I was 8. So I was always interacting with people. I was a musician since I was 8 or 9, performing when I was a teenager. So I was accustomed to being independent and active and exploring new territories and so on. And those things certainly helped. I describe it as jumping off of a diving board when you know the water's going to be cold. You just get yourself in the air is the trick, because then you have no choice. You have to get used to the water.
Yes.
Once you're in.
Good analogy.
So that was really a big part of the approach. I just wasn't going to not get out there. And I was fortunate to have really great rehabilitation. That just makes all the difference. They made me really strong. They taught me the skills. I had a totally supportive family. And all those things allowed me just to keep jumping in the water and just keep getting out there. And I was able to be very independent right away. So I didn't need a lot of assistance. I could dress myself by the time I got home. I had great wheelchair skills. Took a little while to get my mother to let me drive with hand controls, but once that happened, then I was just back out there and at it. Of course, there were a lot of internal adjustments to be made, but functionally, it happened pretty quickly.
Okay, so can you expand on the internal adjustments you just mentioned?
Well, there's this transition that I had to make with my very sense of self, with my identity. It felt odd being in public using a wheelchair. It felt odd being viewed the way I sensed people were viewing me. It was like, no, wait a minute, this isn't me. No, I'm actually I was walking like a few months ago. I wanted credit somehow for being the same as everybody else. And I remember that as part of an internal adjustment process of how I was coping with it, until I realized that the lesson ultimately was whether or not I'm defined by others or myself.
Wow.
That's really what it comes down to, which is a lifelong exercise for absolutely every single one of us. And so I see my disability experience as a catalyst for that process of gaining a grip on my own sense of who I am, which I'm continuing to do. But there is a really clear point when you have a disability of they absolutely don't get who I am. They absolutely don't understand how I do what I do. They exaggerate the difficulty of it. I often hear myself saying to people, it's not as hard as you think. They just don't know how it's done.
Yes.
And so much of it is method, right? And they taught me how. So that let me relax into, I get to define myself. I need to be less concerned, because if I'm buying into what other people are thinking, then I'm going down the wrong path because they have it wrong. This is very clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think what you said is so, so important to stress to people, whether they're disabled or not, that you're not defined by other people's opinions. And if you allow yourself to be, you're really limiting your belief systems about who you are and what's possible for your life. Do you think that has anything to do with the personal responsibility topic?
Well, ultimately, yes, because it's a double-edged sword. If you make the decision that, okay, well, I'm the one who gets to decide who I am, well, now you have to decide who you are and what you're going to do. Suddenly that's where the responsibility really begins, is once you get that, oh, the choices really are mine. Nobody else is going to do it for me. And I have to stop looking to the outside. But of course it's complicated. First of all, I'm still an approval seeker. I always will be. I was a third child. I had two older brothers. So it's just part of my psychology that I recognize is that I do care about what other people think, and we all want to be liked. And there's a difference between living my life to try and get that attention and approval and knowing that the more I come into myself and the more I develop my own set of values and the more I do what I'm best at doing, then it just flows naturally. You can start to relax into it. So it's still about approval and acceptance, but it's not about chasing it. It's about getting that the more I'm just me, then it'll just happen naturally.
So it's attracting it.
It's
Pulling it towards you.
Exactly.
That's a beautiful, beautiful analogy.
I'm still
I love
working
that.
on it, believe me.
Yeah, and I think it's a lifelong process.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned about how personal responsibility starts with having to define yourself once you choose to take that step of not having to be defined by other people's opinions. If someone were out there watching this right now and they're asking themselves, so how do I define myself? What would you suggest?
Wow, that's a big universal question. What interests you? What do you care about? Developing what I call an objective self-witness. We've all got our stuff, and we all have our reactions to things. And to live a life where we learn from those things without judging ourselves, again, really deep, difficult practice that I don't claim to be able to do consistently. But the more I've gained the ability to observe where things come from in me and not totally fall into the kind of embarrassment and self-doubt and fear that flows from those things, because that completely stops you. But instead, try to be a witness and get to what they mean. And that's where we grow. I think those things are lessons. They're meant to be lessons for us, that we let our stuff come up. Certainly in relationship, those things come up. And when you have a partner where you can accept each other, that you're both committed to try and learning about yourselves without identifying you're this all the time. I feel like I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but the disability experience just amplifies all those things. People already have a beginning of knowing what they're interested in, have a sense of what their abilities are. You know, maybe you're good at math, maybe you're not. Maybe you have a sense of music, or you're tone deaf. You know, everybody already has some information already in place about who they are, and it's about picking up on that to follow through on what interests you and what appeals to you and what attracts you, to see where it can go. And in the context of a disability, then maybe there are some issues around, well, okay, how am I going to do this? I might have to do this differently than somebody else. Or the world doesn't think this is, I think maybe it is, and I want to try. So there's another set of things that come up in the context of our disability. But the ultimate responsibility is to not let your disability stop you short, to not second guess in advance like the rest of the world is doing about how far you can get, but making the decision to keep going forward. And maybe you have to fight a little bit to get some resources, or to get the opportunity to try and prove yourself in ways that others don't. So there's a level of self-responsibility that is involved in there, because you just have to bring up that extra juice in ways that maybe other people don't. But ultimately, it's about willingness to accept consequences.
So do you think that personal responsibility is more magnified for someone with a disability?
In certain situations, yes, and in many situations, no. I think it's much more about the fact of how much we are not our disabilities. I think it's much more about seeing ourselves as people the way we want everybody else to see us. You know, it's a fascinating kind of contradiction, because we're all raised in a world that sees disability in this whole set of terms about, you know, heroism and inspiration, or tragedy and overcoming, and all these stereotypes. And how much does a person with a disability believe it themselves? I mean, we cannot be completely sheltered from it getting into our own psyches. There's no avoiding it. So there's some responsibility involved in making that decision to look at our own set of beliefs about ourselves. And so there might be some extra work for somebody to move through that and to realize, oh my gosh, I've bought into that.
So it's important for people with disabilities not to buy into the roles that people without disabilities want to place them in, whether it be hero or villain.
And to become aware that there are some external sources for what they believe about themselves.
Like what?
Well, like all of the imagery that we see in society about disability, about, you know, the heroic images, or the horrible, tragic. It's always in the extremes. It's rarely. How often do you see disability depicted the way we know it is? People
Right.
getting out, just living their lives and doing whatever it takes.
Right.
We're starting to see a little bit more of that in the media, but and just in the language. You know, you and I are wheelchair bound. Right? We're confined to our wheelchairs. And I don't experience it that way. I assume that you don't either. You know, we are liberated by our wheelchairs. They make our lives possible. They're the source of
Right.
our mobility.
Right.
And even that gets seen as a heroic, inspirational thing. So for somebody like me, who has an acquired disability and had to make that transition and that adjustment, when you carry that kind of stuff with you and you think, okay, I have to overcome my disability, and then does that mean that I'm one of those rare few? You see, the bar is artificially raised by this, gives people the impression that you have to be special to do this. And my message when I get to speak to people who are in that early stage of adjustment is, no, that's not what this is about at all. It's about, first of all, learning how it's done, And it's also about being willing to discover, as we all have, that we are adaptive beings, period.
Right.
Everyone's wired with it.
Right. I think people with disabilities want the same thing that every single person wants on this planet. They want that joy, they want that freedom, that love, the opportunity to discover and reach their fullest potential. And I might be saying something that might get me in a little bit in trouble, but
Go ahead.
what I have experienced, because I've worked in helping people with disabilities with the employment world and so on, is that we have put so much effort into fixing other people, fixing the accessibility, fixing our system. And I'm not saying that there aren't things that need to be improved upon, but all of the efforts externally have been on everybody else. And I think that also helps people with disabilities point the finger at everybody else for the difficulties that they've had in their life. But in my humble opinion, I feel like a lot of what we've done is could be in vain if we don't work on ourselves and work on that personal responsibility.
Right.
And that's why I love this topic, because I do think that's the first step in owning our choices and owning how the quality of our life has turned out.
Right. We've been fighting for inclusion. Right?
Yeah.
We've been part of this really dramatic, poignant, recent historical process of fighting for rights, of making changes so that our environment is accessible for those of us who require that, of developing technologies, of improving our health. All of these incredible things have been happening in our lifetimes. You and I have been witnesses to an amazing little slice of this major emergence
History
of people with disabilities. Right, we are absolutely making history. And as those artificial obstacles fall away, and as we get the inclusion we're asking for, now it means we're going to participate more. We're going to participate in our families. We're going to participate in the workplace. We're going to be involved in the community. There's much less self-responsibility involved if you're sitting home, being taken care of, watching television, and so on and so forth. Now you're getting out and you're starting to make some choices that have some impact on your life, on other people's lives, on commitments that you're making to people in the world, in the workplace, for instance. So there's a whole array of self-responsibility that just naturally arises from the inclusion that we are winning. And that's a message that I think is part of this process for many people with disabilities, is for them to get that. Because to make the switch from being accustomed to, we're going to cover your transportation, we're going to, do these things to compensate for the obstacles that have been in your way, but, the obstacles aren't there anymore, no more favors.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so that's a very different psychic switch for, I think, many people with disabilities to make, because they have become accustomed and they have been raised and taught by the society to be in that mode. And to make the change to suddenly, I'm kind of on my own now.
Well,
and that takes getting used to.
Yeah, and I see it as a dance almost, like, people with disabilities, there's this concept of interdependence. It's not always getting your independence and not always being dependent. It's this interdependence. We have to do this dance with one another, with our family members, with the government, with the resources that are in place. And, I've been in places where it's not accessible.
Sure.
I recently called for an event and they said all the wheelchair seating is taken and there's nothing else we can do for you. You're just gonna have to call back and see if if there's any availability down the road.
Been there.
And it's personal. So there's this I'm gonna blame you for not having enough seating for people with disabilities, but at the same time, it's also my personal responsibility to plan things ahead. And so there's this fine line when we're doing this dance between blaming someone else for what, our circumstances, and also taking that personal responsibility for our part in it.
I think society expects people with disabilities to expect favors. And that is huge, because if that's the way society thinks, if that's the way an employer thinks about someone with a disability, if that's the way a potential life partner thinks about somebody with a disability by definition, then they're going to, in expecting that behavior, they're less likely to choose to hire them or to choose to get into that relationship with them because, oh, no, they're difficult. They're going to have all these demands. And so people with disabilities have an opportunity, and I think we need to, as part of our overall program here, is to really break that one down, by demonstrating it, by modeling it, that we're not looking for favors, by getting out saying, no, just give me what I need. And then, I really believe that it's very clear, because I meet a lot of people who have come from that and gotten over it because all they needed was the direct experience of being with me or you or someone who's blind or deaf or whoever.
Can you clarify, come from what?
Come from that attitude of, oh, you're going to need a lot of extra favors, or you're going to be demanding or difficult. You're coming from entitlement, right?
Okay.
Once they have the direct experience of somebody who is taking responsibility, who is committing to doing well at whatever they're doing, then it really falls away pretty easily, right? But because we're still emergent, because this process is still underway, many people are still laboring, and therefore society largely is still laboring under this entitlement model of disability, and that's why it's our task to just get out and demonstrate it. And I really believe it will happen naturally. I don't come from a blaming the world for discriminating us
Right, me neither.
point of view, because that just pushes people back.
Right.
My work, and I think our priority, is to make it safe for people, is to help people relax, because that's really what it's about. Just like chill, we're okay.
Yeah. It's almost like the fight that that we've had to do in history has actually segregated us more, because now we point the finger at the government, they're pointing the finger at us, and it's like this duel.
And it's self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
What it does is it costs us the thing that we're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Rather than, don't be in people's faces about this, accept that it's a transition that takes a long time for these kinds of changes to take place, and they are. This is what's exciting about it. The changes are really so dramatic. It is underway, and it's not going to stop. I absolutely believe the momentum is unstoppable.
Right.
And so we just have to keep moving the process. And certainly there are people who need a little bit more of a push, like we needed to occupy the offices of the president of Greyhound buses because they were not doing what they needed to do. But that's an advocacy strategy in general. We need to be functioning in the world.
So, okay, Gary, I've always had this feeling of needing to take responsibility for the whole disability community. If I go out there in public and I interact with someone and I'm mean to them, I feel like I let down the whole disability community, because I know that person is going to be another person with a disability and they're going to be influenced somehow from my behavior. So how do you accept this personal responsibility and know that you're human, but also understand that we might have a larger role as part of this community?
Yeah, I totally share that with you. We are by default models. We're out there doing what we do. People notice us because we're just more visible, and there's no way to avoid the fact that we're going to model something in our behavior. And better we model that, we're active people and we're just out there doing what we're doing. And I know from the beginning I've understood that I've done that. But there's this other stereotype of a whole suite of them of the angry cripple. There's an expectation, even if we're smiling and friendly. And, people have said to me, well, if it was me, I'd be angry. It's like they entitle us to it. So as soon as we do something that's angry, I know that it plays right into that. It's like, oh, there it is. There's the proof. They assume that we're angry because we have a disability. But when I get angry, usually it's because of something that is obstructing me from being able to live my life. In other words, it's an appropriate emotional response to what's going on. But I know that people don't get that. So we're in a bit of a trap with this.
Yeah.
We do the best we can. I find myself more motivated to be more able to contain whatever's going on in my head that I might feel like saying or doing to somebody, because I know it's going to play into that stereotype, and that is so what I don't want to do. So it works as sort of a, it puts the brakes on for me. And then when I'm not in such a great mood, then I'm just not in a great mood, and I'm sorry I can't always do it, and I can't take the whole thing on myself. And so it has to be okay for us to be a little pissy once in a while, if that's what we're feeling, if that's where we are,
Yeah.
right? Because we really do make a difference, I think, in the broader societal view of disability, person to person, when people see us doing what we're doing and being what we're being. Right?
Very good.
Yeah. But there's sort of no avoiding it. With the parking spot situation,
Yeah.
I frankly don't even bother with the conversation, very rarely, because most of what happens is, oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm not trying to blame you for something. I just want
Right.
you to understand that I have to have the wide spot because I'm a wheelchair user. And if you are somebody who walks and there's another spot over here that isn't the blue one, please, just as a matter of etiquette, use that one to preserve these. I'm not questioning your right to the permit, and I'm not being angry or upset with you, but they can't hear this because they're so caught up in either, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you, or like, hey, you don't have a right to tell me I can't use this.
Right.
So
right.
give
It's
it
like,
up, you know.
It's like the bathroom stalls in ladies' rooms.
Same thing, because I travel
Yeah.
a lot, as do you, and how often do we sit waiting for the wide stall while we have to get an airplane in a few minutes?
Yeah, and it's okay for us to wait our turn. We're not entitled or any more special, but there are physical things that we need that we have to live with. That's just part of being disabled.
Exactly. Part of being disabled is sometimes things do take longer. Sometimes we do get in these situations and they're inconvenient, and so we can either get upset about them or we can advocate for change, which is how we got where we are. That's what people have done, right?
In the beginning, I did say that personal responsibility is a key to opening up a full life of joy, freedom, and love. Can you tell me why? I know it's a huge aspect of having a full life. Can you tell me how that does that? How does that open the door to empowerment for people with disabilities?
Well, on the first level, it's about getting out and doing more and discovering how satisfying it is to function more in the world and to learn and to try things. But what's even more empowering is learning self-acceptance. Because when you get out there and you do start taking risks and you do put yourself out and make commitments and take responsibility for things, you are going to make mistakes. That is the way it works for everybody, right? It's not perfect. Nobody is perfect. And the exercise of being willing to take those chances, accept the consequences, and accept that you're still okay. And it doesn't mean that you can't keep getting out there and keep moving forward, because we're all works in progress.
Right.
And the only way we continue to grow and develop and evolve and learn and get better at whatever we do is through that process of self-responsibility, which includes the walls that we hit, the mistakes that we make. And that's how we learn, that's how we grow.
Right.
And so self-acceptance and self-responsibility go together. They both empower each other.
Very good, very good. And people with disabilities, as humans, can make mistakes and they can succeed outside and independent of their disability.
Absolutely.
Very good. I know that we've come a long ways, the disability movement, in gaining our rights legally and helping larger society understand our physical needs and making the structure set up so we can move through life. What do you think is the next big step for the disability movement? And we're going to end with this question because we are running out of time, but you talk about modern disability. So if you can enlighten us from your perspective.
I think it's about people taking advantage of the gains that we've made. And it really I think comes down to this internal process of believing in ourselves.
Wow, that's
Because, so much of the external stuff has been dealt with. The opportunities are there. But people with disabilities themselves are not yet fully informed of all the stuff that exists. There are surveys of scary percentages of people who don't even know what the ADA is.
wow.
So we still have a population that is substantially sheltered, protected, maybe by their families. And again, just my own personal speculations, that there's a lot of belief that, no, I can't do this, so people aren't even trying. So I think that the next major push of advocacy work is to get to all of these people with disabilities, to help them get a grip on their own potential. And show them, here are the resources, here's how you can do this and that. But society is not investing in that. Rehabilitation is the big example for me. I had 7 weeks of rehabilitation in 1973, and I came out very strong, very independent, very capable. Now, I'd be lucky to have 3 or 4 weeks. We're not investing in making sure that people with disabilities get access to the stuff that exists, the rehab, the technology, the opportunity to gain the skill set, the soft skill set of professionalism and workplace behavior and, their own self-confidence. So that seems like the next big pioneering territory.
So it's like taking personal responsibility from an individual level and magnifying it and rippling it out as a community level.
Yes, and many, many people are doing this.
Yeah.
And so the proof is there.
Yeah.
Right?
We are proof that, living a full life is completely possible.
Exactly. And we just still have to get over that thing of we've done it because we're so special.
Right.
Right? Well, we're special to the degree that we have whatever talents, whatever abilities we have, but we're not special really in any other sense.
So, Gary, with every show that I have, I always like to end on a note of gratitude. So I'm very, very grateful that you were here to share your perspective about personal responsibility and what's next for the disability community. But what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful to be, to have the understanding that my imperfection is how I grow, to pick up on that point that I made earlier. To know that I used to stop myself short, and that my whole experience in all of this work is more and more about just let things be what they are, and that's how I'm going to move forward the most toward what I can do to make a difference in my own life and in the world.
Wow. Well, I know our conversations could go on and on and on and on, so I'm sure I'm going to bring you back for future episodes.
I hope so.
Yes, definitely. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you for joining us today. I know the information we've provided you regarding personal responsibility will serve you if you take the step. And like Gary mentioned, there is nothing different or special about him or I that is different from you. The only difference is that we believed in ourselves, that we did deserve and were worthy of the life we choose and desire. So as you go today and until we meet again, know that you can move forward into the life that you desire, no matter what, and be unstoppable. Gary, I know you share so much information on a variety of topics, and I know you have 3 books out, you have a website. Can you tell our audience what your website address is and where they can find those books if they wanted to learn more about you?
They can find everything they need at moderndisability.com, and that has information about my books, about my work as a speaker, and a lot of information for the business community about disability and employment as well. So it's a pretty information-rich site.